Hey everyone, State Representative Emanuel Welch here. Thank you for joining me for my Sunday edition of Facebook Live Conversation. Today we have a great conversation ahead. We are going to be chatting here with the chairman of the Illinois State Board of Education, Mr. Darren Reisberg. You are going to want to sit tight for the next half hour and listen to our conversation about back to school. But before we do that, I want to introduce Darren to all of you. I've known him for a number of years since my time on the Proviso Township High School District 209 Board of Education. And Darren currently serves as the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives and Deputy Provost at the University of Chicago. He served the university as Vice President and Secretary and was the first Executive Director of the university's Institute of Politics. He currently serves on the Institute's Board of Advisors. Darren previously served as the General Counsel and Deputy Superintendent of the Illinois State Board of Education, and that is the role he served in when I was President of the Proviso School Board, and we talked often about financial oversight panels and things of that nature. In those roles, he counseled the State Superintendent of Education and the State Board of Education on legal policy and operational matters. He was also an employment and labor attorney at the prestigious Chicago law firm of Sitley and Austin. I think we know two famous Chicagoans who also worked at that law firm one time.
That's right.
I think that's where they met.
They did.
Barack and Michelle Obama. But he was also a judicial law clerk for the U.S. District Court Judge Rebecca Paulmeyer, a graduate from Yale Law School and Duke University. That is quite an impressive resume there, sir. Let's welcome the chairman of the Illinois State Board of Education, Darren Reisberg. How are you, counsel?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Representative.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking some time out of your Sunday afternoon to have this conversation with us. You having an opportunity to at least enjoy the weekend?
I am. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to your audience, but certainly it's been gorgeous outside and I've really enjoyed it. But I did want to just really say, it's really special that you've been creating this space for constituents across the state and maybe even beyond this state to just learn more about the critical issues of the day. Today, obviously being school opening and all the challenges and opportunities at hand. But you've been a real champion for education here in Illinois for a long time, not just pre-K to 12, but also higher ed. So just on behalf of our State Board of Education and the agency, really just want to thank you for your leadership and partnership.
Thank you, Darren. I really appreciate that. We're going to launch right into it since I only have you for about the next half hour or so. And if you haven't shared this feed yet, please go ahead and share it. Because Chairman here is going to have a lot of good information for us that parents want to know as kids head back to school. Many districts, including the largest here in the state, Chicago Public School System, and my old district, Proviso Township High School District 209, recently announced that they're starting school remotely. In fact, Proviso starts remotely tomorrow. Many Catholic schools and private schools are starting in person. So the state has left it up to local school districts to decide. Darren, you want to tell us a little bit about that? What's been the guidance that the state board has given to school districts that have allowed them to make the decision to go remote or in many instances in person?
Sure. Well, we certainly respect the decisions that, our local 852 local school districts, as well as the private schools, are making here. But the state, ever since the governor moved all regions into phase 4, has really strongly encouraged in-person education as much as is possible. And in those instances where either a hybrid or, an almost exclusively remote situation is at hand for a district based on, their ultimate decisions, we really have prioritized in-person learning for particular populations, for special education students, students with IEPs, students with 504 plans, English language learners, and students under the age of 13. So that's been our prioritization. But again, what we've strongly encouraged is in-person instruction for all students as much as is reasonably possible. And so, as you said, we are a local control state. We know our 852 school districts, take some pride in that. And you, as a former board chair of a local school district, understand that. So, we are happy to be able to create a structure where there, are certain public health requirements, which we can get into in a little bit, but that gives school districts then the flexibility to decide what's right for their communities.
Absolutely. Well, I certainly believe in the school district, area, that one size doesn't necessarily fit all either. Every district is unique in and of itself, and kids actually miss their friends. So if a district can go in person, that's good that they have that option. However, I want to ask you about remote learning a little bit, because remote learning has posed several challenges for students. How are we ensuring that equitable access for all students to a high quality education during this remote learning? I don't know if that's happening right now.
Yeah, it's certainly posed challenge for students. It's posed challenge for families. It's posed challenges for teachers. It's not been without significant bumps, and those bumps I expect will continue. But we have learned a lot, and so hopefully we'll be able to take what we've learned to improve remote learning when we need to be engaging in it. But like you said, the crisis and remote learning has really exposed inequities, across our state. We know those inequities exist, both for low-income families and families of color. But this digital divide is really where we're seeing that magnified. So one way we're trying to, at the state board and at the state generally, to deal with this is through how we're deploying federal funding that had come through in the CARES Act earlier this year at the beginning of the summer. So there were over $600 million that had come into Illinois through the CARES Act, both to the State Board of Education and to the governor's office. About $500 million of those dollars are going directly to school districts through the state, but really through a formula. And those districts are being strongly encouraged to utilize, a good amount of those dollars for devices and for connectivity to be able to help with the digital divide. And then the governor's office and ISB are taking the additional $100 million. So it's, again, about $612 million in total. But $100 million of the dollars that are, more in the hands of the governor's office and ISB to try to strategically push further procurement of digital devices and connectivity, as well as to push professional development for educators in terms of being able to learn how to be teaching with new technologies, and also to families who are understandably really struggling with how, when they're home with their kids, to be able to try to help them remote learn. And there are issues in terms of language, et cetera. So we're really trying to use the dollars strategically to shore up this digital divide that we're seeing here in Illinois starkly, and we're seeing it all across the country.
Absolutely. It's real. One of the things that remote learning has done is it's posed a challenge for students with special needs. And that's one of the things that I've received emails about, calls to the office about, is remote learning for students with special needs. Tell us a little bit about that. What is ISB's concerns or guidance when it comes to students with special needs and remote learning?
Yeah, so this is a real concern. I'm not surprised that you're receiving those, calls from your constituents. We are certainly at the State Board of Education receiving those calls. So, big picture wise, I think, there was a real concern amongst school districts about, how to actually follow, the pretty strict federal laws. There's state laws too, but the federal IDEA really lays out requirements for special education students, including the individual educational programs, the IEPs for special education students. And there was a big push here in Illinois and elsewhere across the country for the U.S. Department of Education to relax some of those requirements. They did not relax those requirements. And I think it's a good thing that they didn't, although I understand how districts are struggling to meet some of what they need to be doing for these students. But these students require as much attention as possible. And so what we've tried to say is that, now that we know you still need to follow the laws as they've been written, what guidance can we give to help you do that? One is that we really feel that you should prioritize in-person instruction for your special education students wherever possible. We know nothing compares to face-to-face interactions that students have with their teachers and with each other, like we've said. But for these students in particular, being able to engage on a personal level rather than through a screen is going to be that much more important. We've also just included extensive recommendations in a document. We have an over 100-page document on learning recommendations or instruction recommendations that went out to our school districts. And there are sections that really lay out strategies that educators can be using for their special education population in all three settings, those three settings being in person, which I said is ideal for this population, a hybrid where you're doing some instruction in person and some remotely, and then full remote where that has to be, for whatever reason, what you do. And so I give a ton of credit to the state agency as well as all of the stakeholders they worked with to really outline with special education expertise how to be handling instruction in each of those circumstances.
Hey everyone, I am here with the chairman of the Illinois State Board of Education, Mr. Darren Reisberg, and we are live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Please share this conversation with your group of friends because the chairman is imparting a lot of great information on us as we head back to school out here in the suburbs of Chicago. We start school tomorrow. We start it remotely. And some of our private schools start this week as well. Darren, I want to ask you about private schools. As we said, one size does not fit all, and the state has given school districts the authority to either go in person or remotely. My question is as we've seen numbers increase even here in the state, not as dramatically as some of our neighboring states, are there any concerns as private schools open for in-person learning with schools being super spreaders at all, or are you comfortable with the things you're seeing so far?
Well, I think that we at this point are feeling relatively comfortable with the fact that certain private schools are making the decision, just like certain public schools, to be opening in person if they feel like they have the ability to open safely. Just to be very clear about the restrictions or limitations put on schools that are opening, they do apply in Illinois through the governor's orders, not just to the public school districts, but to the private schools. So the requirements around face coverings and social distancing and everything else that school districts are going to need to be operating consistently with will apply to the private schools. What we saw in places like Georgia recently with passing periods and just packed hallways with students not wearing face coverings. We hope that based on all of the education that we've provided to school districts and to our private schools, that they wouldn't flout the requirements that we've laid out very, very clearly and that we think are reasonable, and that we would avoid those types of super spreading incidents. And to the extent that we get to a place, Representative, where we see a resurgence, and we may talk about this a little bit later, it would be the non-publics too that might have to change the way in which they're operating and go towards all remote.
You talk about not flouting the requirements. Let me ask you about those requirements. For schools that are returning to in-person learning, what is ISB mandating schools do to protect students, staff, and teachers? Is it any of those requirements mandates, or is it totally up to the district?
Yeah, it's a good question. Mandates, it's usually quite a bad word, right?
Right.
That school districts don't like, but yes. So, we're not saying that school districts that are opening, are opening in a pre-pandemic sort of way. So there are requirements both on public schools and privates. Those include use of appropriate PPE, including face coverings. And the state is trying its best through, the provision of 2.5 million face coverings to our public school districts to, help districts out. there are no more than 50 individuals are able to be in a particular space, including a school bus. Social distancing must be adhered to as much as reasonably possible. So there is a bit of a caveat there, but social distancing is required. Daily symptom screenings and temperature checks, or alternatively, if a district or a school has self-certification system for students and staff, that can be used, and increased school-wide cleaning and disinfection. So those are per se requirements that school districts need to adhere to if they are operating. And then beyond that, school districts have leeway in terms of how they want to operate their reopening.
You know, the Illinois Department of Public Health does a pretty good job of putting out daily information, letting us know the number of cases, the number of daily tests, the positivity rate. And I think we're down to 4% as our positivity rate. We've been hovering around there for the last couple of weeks. What would actually cause the state to close all schools for a second time and mandate remote learning for publics and privates?
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, it's really important that school districts and the private schools, are, coordinating very closely with their local departments of health just to get a sense of, whether, infection rates are getting to a place where they feel that a change, that both the public health departments or the school districts or schools feel a change needs to be made. Our joint guidance communicated to school districts was just very clear that they need to be prepared to return to remote instruction, which could be triggered by a statewide or regional resurgence of the virus. And so the governor's office and the Illinois Department of Public Health, as well as local health departments, are being super vigilant, of course, about where that level is. So I don't know, coming from the State Board of Education's perspective, exactly what the tipping point would be, but that's something that I know our governor and public health department are watching very carefully. And I think, as they have been over the course of the last few months, just operating in the best interests of our kids and families.
So I think I saw a tweet earlier this week that a Memphis, Tennessee school district wouldn't even consider closing unless their positivity rate was 25% or something like that. So you don't know what the magic number is, 5%, 8%, 10%. You don't know what number it would be to trigger the state saying, okay, everyone, we're going back to remote learning.
I don't know what that is. And I think, what's been important to recognize throughout this pandemic is that, everybody is continuing to learn, including, our highest leaders and public health experts. And so, that magic number, based on more information, if there is such a number, may change. So I wouldn't want to even guess. But, my sense is that, there will be a point in time, or there could be a point in time where, changes will have to be made if we don't go in the right direction. So mask up, everybody.
Mask up, everyone. That's the best advice you can have right now. And if you want to continue to take advantage of these things that we're doing here in Illinois, wear your mask. It's that simple. But, let me ask you this, Darren. The start of school typically is the start of flu season. And doctors and the CDC, I think this week, said that this flu season could be one of the worst ones yet. Are schools being provided extra funding? I know you talked about that earlier, but are they being provided extra funding to purchase PPE and cleaning supplies and to try to keep these spaces as safe as possible?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, I mean, the COVID was a double whammy, in terms of closing school districts or forcing school districts to close, as well as then hitting the state budget, as you know full well, in a way that, the state board's request for additional evidence-based funding to school districts just couldn't be met, just given the revenue drops that we've seen. So in terms of state funding, there isn't additional funding to be able to provide school districts at this time, but the federal funding that I mentioned, this $512 million that goes directly to the districts, as well as some additional dollars that we have, certainly can be used, as we've indicated in our guidance, to purchase cleaning supplies and other necessities to maintain the operation and continuity of service. There are master contracts that help with pricing to allow districts to enter into contracts with vendors to purchase PPE and cleaning supplies. And if districts aren't able to procure enough PPE through existing channels, they can contact their local emergency management authority. And I say this, though, not minimizing how difficult this is for school districts and communities with these additional costs that, will need to be incurred. And we say, we want school districts to use those additional federal dollars for connectivity and devices, but then they also have to use it for, cleaning. And so the money runs out, quickly. So, these are really hard decisions for school districts. I give a ton of credit to our school district administrators and boards across the state for everything that they're doing, and the teachers, of course, to try to do their best with what is a really, really hard situation. And from the State Board of Education's perspective, we're just trying to create an environment where there is enough guidance and where we can get funding out where possible as quickly as possible so that we can help our school districts be able to educate their kids.
Darren, you've talked about money a couple of different times here so far. Is this additional monies like from the CARES Act, or are we talking about the money the schools usually get?
No, good question. This is additional money through the CARES Act that came in the spring. And, our hope, we've all been watching very carefully what's happening on Capitol Hill. And unfortunately, what we thought might mean an additional infusion of federal dollars to the states that would go down to the districts didn't happen before the recess in Washington. So, we're just crossing our fingers that there's an understanding at the federal level that far more resources are necessary to be able to get our school districts across the country, particularly here in Illinois, through the rest of the 2020-2021 school year. Absolutely.
The end of last school year and the beginning of this school year are definitely anything beyond the norm. From ISBE's perspective, what is the guidance? Will students be receiving grades this year? Will they be penalized for attendance issues? I mean, we're encouraging kids if they're not feeling well, if they got a sore throat, temperature is a little high, to stay home. So how does this impact attendance, and will they be penalized?
Yeah, so it's, this is one of those areas where, for the most part, the state, has deferred to local control in terms of issues around grading, for example. But we've been very clear through our recommendations that any return to traditional grading policies, and we, think that there should be a return to grading policies to try to get us back to a relatively normal world, but that ensures that the students all have the necessary tools, technology, and teacher supports at school and at home to complete their assignments, to complete projects in a timely manner. But again, in terms of how exactly that plays out on the ground, school districts really have the leeway to determine that. Daily attendance and engagement of students should be expected when students are participating in classes or remotely. So once declared that a school is taking remote learning days or blended sort of hybrid days, those will be considered days of attendance. And districts participating, what we're saying is districts participating in, any form of in-person instruction shouldn't have sort of perfect attendance awards that require in-person instruction in order to be able to qualify for that, given that we don't want to discourage students who are not feeling well to actually come into school, which obviously wouldn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, and I think we're guilty of it too. Parents know that their kids aren't feeling quite 100%, but you still send them to school. I think this year it'll be totally the opposite. When they're not feeling well, you're going to keep them home, and knowing that they're not going to be penalized is a good thing. We know this is not a normal school year, and we're going to get through this by working together. Let me ask you a question about teachers, though. Similarly, again, at the end of last school year, now the beginning of this school year, teachers in many districts are working remotely. How are teachers being evaluated? Have tenure rules been suspended during the pandemic? Tell us a little bit about that. What is ISBE's guidance on that?
Sure. Well, ISBE passed, with your support, so thank you, and an omnibus, piece of education legislation in the spring, that sought to ensure that educators would not be penalized by what's happened as a result of the pandemic. So, evaluations in this past school year were not able to be utilized to in any way reduce the summative evaluation that a teacher would have received the prior year. So essentially, evaluations were held steady. And, for those teachers that might have been based on a previous needs improvement evaluation, for example, on a remediation plan, the timelines for those plans were told to be able to give them a bit more time to try to improve, because trying to improve within the environment in the spring was just not, I think, a reasonable expectation. Tenure was not paused. So teachers that were marching towards tenure would continue that march. So there was nothing statutorily that was changed in that respect. So I think from the state standpoint, both, ISB and the legislature, I think there's, just been a recognition of how, in what is such a strange time, can we be as fair as possible to all of the people who toil every day to try to actually just make life better for kids. And so I think we've seemed to strike a good balance there.
Hey, Darren, we only have a little less than 5 minutes left. I only have a couple more questions. And again, I really appreciate you doing this. I see Ms. Angela Bikema wants to thank you for doing this. It's been very informative. I got to tell you, I call myself a junkie and I follow this stuff every day, but I've learned a lot from you so far. But just a couple more questions.
Sure.
I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old going into 3rd and 1st grade. And as any parent, you'd be nervous about going into in-person learning. Tell us, what advice would you give to nervous parents right now as we head back to school in the midst of a global pandemic?
Sure. Well, I think that, I do not have kids myself. So my kids are the 2 million kids here in Illinois, I guess I would say. So
they're all yours.
They're all mine. But I would say, I completely understand, why there would be this anxiety, why there would be the nervousness, both in terms of the educational progress of everybody's kids, as well as the health and safety. And, what happened in the spring in particular around educational progress was a checkerboard across the state, as we've already talked about. I think we've learned a lot. So that's one of the, sort of a peace of mind that I'd like to provide to our families. We've learned a lot, both in terms of how to best protect our children when we do have in-school instruction. And I know, because I follow all of our school districts on social media and we hear how they're doing this, those that are looking to bring back their kids are really taking a ton of time to try to do this as carefully as possible with the involvement of a lot of stakeholders. And I think we've learned a lot around education of our kids in a remote environment. So, we really feel like we're at a much better place than we were in the spring. And, we're going to stay on it and just try to continue to learn, continue to improve. And I think we have the right leaders and certainly the right school leaders across the state in order to get there. So I just ask everybody to continue bearing with us, but, to be reaching out, to be attending your own board meetings on a local level, to tune into the state board meetings at the state level and just ask questions and push us.
Hey, I'll tell you, I'm very involved with both my public and private schools in the area. And I think all of the districts are doing a great job of, putting plans in place. They've been working very hard this summer to make the best decisions for the kids and families and the folks that work in their schools. And some have chosen remote learning, some have chosen in-person learning. But do know that I've had the conversations and seen the plans, and a lot of these districts are working their butts off to get it right.
That's great to hear.
And so I want to thank you for all the guidance that you guys have given. Now, there's going to be some folks that flout the requirements, as you said earlier. Is there a way, or should people contact the State Board of Education if they feel like a district's not following your requirements and guidelines? And if so, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. I think, so I would say if that's what they're seeing, I think they should be reaching out to their local health department as well as to the state board. So both of us, certainly we have an email address, which is COVID-19 at isbe.net. And so any school district that, anybody, any constituent that feels that they want to reach out to us because of any questions that they have or concerns about the way in which school is operating for their kids should reach out to COVID-19 at isbe.net. And my personal email is darren.reisberg at isbe.net, and very happy to have anybody who has a question reach out, and we will make sure that it gets to the right place and that you get a prompt response.
And everyone, he does respond. You might not like the answer you get,
Right.
but he does respond. And that's been my motto. You might not like the answer you get from me, but I do respond. So if you ever have a question in this regard, you can also feel free to email me at repwelch@emanuelchriswelch.com. Of course, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and YouTube at Rep Chris Welch. But this has been a super fast half hour. Chairman, I want to thank you for this great conversation. It's been very informative. The folks have really enjoyed the conversation. And I just want to give you a little bit of advice. 3 things that I know you're doing very well. Watch your distance, wear your mask, and wash your hands. As my daughter would say, for at least 20 seconds. So thank you, Darren. I really appreciate you taking time today.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. Take care, everybody.
Take care, my friend.